Greetings, fellow modelers and collectors and fans. Phil Lister here of Lister Model Works with a little mini tutorial. This was kind of a spur of the moment thing, actually. I hadn't planned this, but I thought even though I've demonstrated a lot of these techniques in other videos, I thought in this particular case I would also cover the color choices that I'm going to use. What we're going to do here, or what I'm going to do and you're going to watch me do, is I'm going to paint this base for a hunchback model that I'm doing for a client. It's the one where he's carrying off Esmeralda, and I have the bulk of the figure here. And I've still got a little bit of putty work, a little bit of cleanup to do on all of that yet. But anyway, I'm up to the point where I can do the work on the base. Now, this kit does come with the facade of the cathedral, but the client decided he did not want that used. So rather than use that, we're just simply going to use the existing kit base without the full facade. So rather than just paint this a monotone gray or a tan color, I'm actually going to break up the surface a little bit. So I'm going to use various earthen tones. I'm going to use grays, different tones of gray thrown in with a little bit of tans and browns, that sort of thing, just to keep the whole base from looking so monotone. So I thought this way, in this particular video, I can cover the color choices and mixing the colors right on the palette, which you can see right here. I'm simply using an ordinary paper plate in place of a paint palette. So the whole basic technique utilizes the same basic principles and ideas of when an artist is painting a picture. So, you know, we simply start with, you select a color, and we're going to put a couple of blobs of color on the palette, okay, that we're going to then use and mix so that I end up with all the various tones. And you just simply want to put some color out. You may have to add more as you go along, and of course I use a lot of basic colors. I don't buy, really and truly, unless if I'm doing something that requires a particular mixed color, I do a lot of color mixing, which is exactly why I end up with so many of these little white plastic cups. By the time I'm through painting a model, I must have about 25 of these spread out all over the workbench, and that's simply because of all the color mixing I do. So now that I have the colors laid out on the palette, as you can see here, it's simply a question of which do I start with first. Now, if I'm starting with a gray color, I'm naturally going to begin with white and black. So in this particular instance, I'm going to dip the brush just ever so lightly into the paint, and then a little bit of black, not much, until I end up with the gray that I'm looking for to start with, okay? And whenever you dry brush, you should always use a brush, an old brush, let's say, that is more like a powder puff than anything else. In other words, you really don't want to start dry brushing with something like this, for example, although you could get away with this. But it's always best to take an old brush that you've had for a while, and as long as you clean it when you're done, you can continue to use it quite often whenever you're dry brushing. But anyway, now I've got just enough paint on this brush, but I want to test it before I start scrubbing against the surface of the model. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a paper towel, and I'm going to rub off some of the paint, like so. And as you can see, you can already see the pattern of what we're kind of looking for, because you simply want the lighter color paint to hit the surface of the model and not exactly go all over the surface. So in other words, when you start scrubbing it, okay, so as I'm scrubbing, you can already see where the lighter shade is just really and truly just hitting the uppermost surfaces. And this, of course, this is the technique of dry brushing. And as you can see, there you go. Okay. Hopefully you can really begin to see this properly. I know the camera's on autofocus, so it may go in and out a little bit. But anyway, you kind of get the idea. Okay. And that's pretty much what you're doing. And you can, of course, vary the shades according to what you're trying to do here. In other words, if you're trying to make this a little bit darker, well, then you can add a little bit more black. Okay, but you really don't want to go too dark with it. And again, you just want to take that old paper towel and take off a lot of this excess. Now, let's just say, for example, you run into a problem and you have areas where it's kind of heavy. Well, you can always come back and do a wash over those areas, a darker wash that'll help even all that out. But all I'm interested in right now is I'm trying to get the lighter shade onto the stones. So that's really all I'm worried about at this point. And you see, by doing it like this, you end up with a lighter edge as well, which is really what you want too, because you want the edges of the stones to stand out against the darker, mortar lines in there. So that's what you're really looking for. And again, if you make it too light, you can always come back with a wash and you can fix it. So that's never really a problem. If your dry brushing is a little on the dark side, then you can simply come back and lighten your dry brushing color up and go over it again. So you can always make it lighter. Making it darker requires a whole nother step because, like I said, then you have to do a wash, or you can take the same color as the base coat and put that in your airbrush and lightly spray it. So it's not that big a deal if it ends up too light. But then again, you're probably going to want to come back and do some washes over it anyway. Stonework, anything you're doing involving rocks or stone, anything earthen, is naturally going to have a very organic look to it. So when you're applying your dry brushing and your washes, you can blend all that together so that you end up with different tones, and they all sort of meld together, so to speak. And now I'm actually making a kind of a brown color and lightening that up a little bit. So here basically what I'm doing is I'm using a little bit of black, the white. I'm using all four colors basically at different degrees, different amounts to give me a brown color. And again, I can use this color with more white or more black or even more red to vary the tone, to vary the hue, as it were, to give me different shades of brown. So, and again, I'm just going to take off the excess on a paper towel, and then I'm going to come back and I'm going to make this stone a brown. Okay. And you see, when the brown actually goes over the lighter gray, all it actually does is it just simply creates a lighter shade of the brown. So a lot of the early dry brushing, especially using a lighter shade, that's going to be maintained throughout, unless you get too heavily handed with it. And then you can always come back and apply, you know, like a little bit more of the red to it. This is the fun thing about painting things that are very organic, is that you know, the sky's the limit. You can use any tones you want, any sort of tones that you've seen in nature, or any stonework on any building, you can pretty much recreate. So that's really the cool thing about doing this. And I'm picking stones at random, and I don't want to do the stones that are right next to each other. So I'm skipping a couple of stones over, and again, I'm applying the brown here. Now I want to lighten them up just a little, so I'm going to add a little bit of more white off of my palette, and maybe a little bit more yellow there, just to keep it from looking too pale and pasty. And then again, I'm going to go over this. And again, I can use washes. I can go over this with anything. I'm just gonna add a little bit more yellow and brown. I mean, a little bit more of the yellow and red to it. And again, I'm just going to lightly go over the surface. And as you can see here now, we have actually we have like two different shades here, or two different depths there, two different this one's a little bit darker than this one is. Okay, so now I'm going to come back and I'm going to use a little bit more yellow and white. So I'm going to end up with a tan color instead of really just a brown. And again, it can get kind of messy with all the different paper towels. I mean, already I've got two paper towels here already that are full of paint, and I'm going to alter the shade of this one a little bit. So I'm just gonna, again, basically, I'm just sort of touching on the stone here. So I've just touched on this. And again, I'm just trying to lighten it up a little bit, as you can see. Okay. So we have some contrast between the stones. And I'm just going to proceed like that, just because, again, I want these lighter tones. You know, if you mix up a gray, let's say, and you add just a hint of red to it, well, then you're going to end up with a very warm looking gray. You can also add blue if you want a cooler effect. Okay. So this way, all the stones, and now I could even take perhaps a little bit of the green, and I can add a blob of green to the palette. And I'm not going to add a tremendous amount of green, however. But perhaps a little bit of that mixed, just a little bit of red. And again, it just alters the tone so that you end up with a different color on the base. And I could take, for example, this stone back here and just lightly go over this. And again, the whole trick is you just want to touch the surface. You're not really trying to scrub or push anything or grind anything into the overall surface. Okay, so now I ended up with an even different color. And I can add a little bit more of the green, perhaps a little bit more white to the whole thing. These craft paints are really somewhat transparent, which is a good thing and a bad thing. In a case like this, where you're dry brushing these different tones onto the stonework, having the colors a little bit on the transparent side is actually a good thing, because this way it blends with the color underneath a little bit, so it doesn't have that stark look of green. Let's say it's a little bit more of has a little bit more of a brownish tint to it as well. And after all, that's what we're really after. We want that we want that earthen look, not a stark, bright toy sort of look to it. And that's really the whole point. So all I'm doing is I'm just creating on the fly different shades so that the stonework just simply doesn't have the same look. So that there's different tones being created for all of this stonework. So like, for example, if you wanted to have a little bit more of a clay sort of look, you can come back, you can just simply add red, and now you've got more of a reddish brown or a clay sort of look, so that, again, you know, you're varying the tone so that they all don't have the same overall look. This is not coming out, fortunately it's coming out great because I don't have all the same colors. It doesn't look monotone. That's what that's what I'm really trying to say here. It doesn't look monotone, and that's really what I'm trying to achieve. So as you can see, here's the palette with the colors, and as you can see, it is a total wreck. And of course, here we have the finished base. Well, it's not exactly finished. I need to fix this. There is a definite crack here. So I need to go over that and correct that. And then again, the other thing, like I said, is I need to seal this with dull coat. And then after that, I'm going to come back with some black and go into here. I'm going to airbrush feather a little bit of a black shading, kind of a vignette around each stone. Seal that with dull coat again, and then come back with maybe a couple of washes or something, and then finally give that a final coat of dull coat to seal the whole thing. And then the base will be complete. And then it's time to move on to the figure. So that pretty much wraps up this little mini demonstration. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope that you all got something out of it. Again, it's all about experimentation. It's all about taste as well as experimentation. So basically, by applying these few colors, I was able to achieve this result. So again, just have fun, play around with different colors. But again, don't be too gaudy or garish with your colors. You want to try to keep them somewhat subdued. But you can have fun, and you don't have to worry about a monotone base. So that's pretty much it. Until next time, this is Phil Lister of Lister Model Works. Go paint a model.